Hey everybody, just a quick video this time while I'm working on my next big project. First, I just want to address a few points raised in my previous video. If you don't care about that, and considering I don't have a lot of recurring viewers, I don't see why you would, just skip to the timestamp shown on the video. So, first and foremost, audio issues. I hear you, I saw the comments, and I agreed even beforehand. I knew my mic sucked, but I didn't expect my first couple of videos to get even a fraction of the attention that they got, so I just bit the bullet and got myself a proper mic. The difference should be, and I hope it is, noticeable. Second, disagreeing with my points of view is perfectly fine, but please at least watch the video in its entirety before you comment, because there's been at least one comment in my previous video that brings something up that I already addressed in the video itself.
Now, obviously, Bethesda's game worlds are huge, at least since Morrowind, but even Morrowind's world isn't exactly tiny. I mean, yes, Daggerfall is absolutely massive, but it's procedurally generated with, from what I understand, no reason to actually explore it without fast travel. So, that is a game that fully embraced it. How well that works for it, I can't say, because I never played it.
The point of these kinds of videos, that is to say, my first two videos and this one as well, once I get to it, is to discuss various game designs and figuring out what makes games good. Of course, different strokes for different folks, not everything that I like is going to appeal to everybody else, but I do believe there's certain design decisions that are broadly better than others, depending on the game's genre. And so, this brings me to my final point for the last video, disagreeing with me purely based on the video title. Look, I know I'm making provocative titles. I have to get people's attention somehow, and I don't want to do any horrific clickbait crap. I believe my titles so far have been representative of what I believe and discuss in the videos, just worded provocatively. So I know such titles themselves make viewers form an opinion of what I am going to say in the video before they even watch it, but like I said in my last point, if you are going to disagree with me, at least watch some of the video before commenting, and please make some sort of an argument as to why you disagree with me. Because, and this brings me to the topic of this video, I don't think my views on game design are that different from the majority of gamers. The title of this video, for example, is What People Get Wrong About Checklist Games, and I'm sure that there are some people that will presume that I'm going to argue that checklists are a good game design decision. But I won't. I think checklists, more often than not, especially in games that are specifically labeled as quote-unquote checklist games, are bad. What I want to point out, however, is that actually you'd be hard-pressed to find a game that isn't a checklist game. Just from the top of my head, there's stuff like Tetris, Pong, and various sports games that truly aren't checklist games. Outside of those, pretty much every game is a checklist game. For example, I think most people, when they hear the term checklist game, will think of, at the very least, Assassin's Creed, but quite possibly all Ubisoft games. I don't know if I would say all Ubisoft games, but aside from Assassin's Creed, Far Cry for sure falls into this category. Then there's Ghost of Tsushima, Rage 2, Just Cause, and, according to some, I never played it myself, Days Gone. Stuff like that. I'm sure there's plenty more, I just haven't played them myself. However, realistically, there's way more games that are checklist games, but for some reason, people just don't label them as such. The most obvious and probably most well-known game here would have to be Stardew Valley. Then there's stuff like Graveyard Keeper, which of course is very similar to Stardew Valley anyway, followed by Power Wash Simulator, House Flipper, and games like that. Just between these two lists, you can probably see that the label checklist games is perceived completely differently. In the first category, it seems, at least to me, that the label has a much more negative connotation. Not saying that the games themselves, in their totality, are necessarily bad. I personally enjoy pretty much all of the games mentioned there. But when reviewing games, I've seen people attribute the checklist game category to them as a negative, at least in the cases of Assassin's Creed, Rage 2, and Ghost of Tsushima. And finally, we have the vast majority of games for which people don't attribute that label, but they clearly are checklist games. Here you have the vast majority of MMOs, certainly World of Warcraft and all the World of Warcraft likes, arguably Black Desert Online as well, though with Black Desert Online people generally complain about how grindy it is rather than anything else. Anyway, In this category, you also have pretty much any single-player RPG. I mean, what are quest logs if not checklists? Even in strategy games, in campaigns, you'll often have a checklist of things to do, usually called objectives, that don't just begin and end with defeat all opponents, though ultimately that is usually what you have to do in the end. This reminds me of Paradox games as well. You'd be hard-pressed to call their games checklist games. Indeed, for the most part, they really aren't, and I am mainly talking about Europa Universalis 4 here with their mission trees. Those are a form of checklists, but at least for me, they are incredibly fun. And this brings me to the main question I want to pose. Why are checklists in some games acceptable and downright fun in others, while in others still, they are actually horrible and either boring or not fun to interact with? Yeah, if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that the main deciding factor is the contextualization of your tasks on the checklist. For example, in role-playing games like your Skyrims and, as I like to bring it up, Gothics, your checklists are quest logs and your quests are contextualized, and while there is some repetitiveness in them, in that usually you'll have to kill at least one enemy to complete them, the enemies that you fight and the locations in which you fight them will be different. This applies to fetch quests as well. Very rarely will you get a quest that requires you to pick an item up without it being guarded in some fashion by a hostile NPC. MMOs, or at least WoW, and I can also speak for Lord of the Rings Online, are more repetitive in that you will often have to fight the same enemy, just a higher level and maybe of a different color, stuff like that. But since those worlds are so huge, that repetitiveness isn't too obvious. In fact, what bothers me personally in modern mouse questing the most is the formulaic nature of the questing structure. What I mean by that is, you will get a quest to go somewhere. Once you get to that place, you'll get 2 quests, usually to kill some mobs and collect something. You'll turn those 2 quests in, get 2 more quests to do something similar, turn them in, get 2 more quests to do something similar, turn them in, get a quest to kill a named mob, turn it in, get a quest to go to the next location, and repeat the process. And I think this repetitiveness, stripped of context, is why checklist games are bad. For example, in Rage 2, if you do not care that much about the gunplay, it will be boring to look at a map and see all those dots that you have to clear before you can continue the story. For me, that's no problem. I really love the gunplay in that game, but if the players had more context for why we have to clear each of those locations, and if the enemies in those locations were a bit more varied, it probably wouldn't feel so checklisty. Also, just the map itself having all those locations marked doesn't help either. And that's even something that Skyrim does as well. It even marks the dungeons you've cleared as cleared. But Skyrim isn't considered a checklist game, and I'm not saying that it is, at least not in that negative sense of the word. So again, why? Of course, like I alluded to earlier, Assassin's Creed is probably the most notorious checklist game series out there. I don't mind that at all, but with it, I can see why people are tired of the formula. Again, for me, especially since the combat overhaul in Origins, I really just enjoyed their worlds and the combat enough to just be happy to clear all the different locations and do all the optional assassinations and whatnot. But I'm bringing Assassin's Creed up to point out that, again, the maps in those games alone scream checklist. The same could be said for Forspoken and probably all those negative checklist games. But while the maps with all the different icons that you quote-unquote have to quote-unquote clear or explore or whatever certainly seem to be a common feature of all these negative checklist games, I don't think it's the maps that are the root cause of the reason why these checklists are negative. Rather, they're the outcome, or if you prefer, the symptom. So yeah, in conclusion, I think bad checklists are, well, bad because they seem lazy, because they are lazy. The games basically filled their worlds with stuff to do with little to no context and hope that the gameplay itself will carry them. At least that's what I think makes certain checklists bad and not others, like I said. But I would like to hear some thoughts on this. Bear in mind, I'm no game developer. I just like talking about this sort of shit. And to answer the question posed in the title of this video, what people, at least seemingly, get wrong about checklist games is that there's way more checklist games out there, they just don't register them as such. Right, like I said, a shorter video for a change, just to keep posting while I'm working on the next big project, and oh boy, in between all of the other stuff that I have to do, that one will take a while. I'll see if I can divide it into parts and still keep the cohesion of what I want to say in it. If not, I'm sure I can come up with something else to talk about before that one is finished. But for now, thanks for watching and have a good day.